The Terracotta Warriors, a household name to millions worldwide. But archaeology is still unraveling their secrets. How did ancient craftsmen do something never done before? Create an 8,000-strong army of clay. Now, 21st century science is making astonishing new discoveries and blowing away our cherished image of these world-famous wonders. The year is 221 BC. In Mexico, the city of Teotihuacan is expanding, on track to become ancient America's greatest metropolis. In Egypt, the city of Alexandria boasts a 130-meter lighthouse, one of the tallest buildings in the world. And in China, a team of craftsmen begins one of mankind's most incredible creations. More than 2,000 years later, in 1974, farmers digging a well near the Chinese city of Xi'an discovered their work. Strange fragments of clay sculpted in human form. Chinese archaeologists dug test probes, which led to a staggering find. 8,000 clay warriors, infantry, archers, generals, cavalry, buried in 3 pits near the tomb of one of history's most powerful men. The brilliant soldier and ruthless conqueror called Cheng Shi Huangdi. More than 2,000 years ago, he unified 7 warring kingdoms into a single empire called China, giving himself the title of First Emperor, and building himself one of the biggest pyramid tombs ever seen on Earth. Why did China's first emperor order 8,000 life-size clay soldiers for his tomb? Something no Chinese ruler had ever done before. And how did his artists make those 8,000 statues, each nearly 2 meters tall and weighing up to 300 kilograms, something no Chinese craftsman had ever done before? The vast achievement of the Terracotta Warriors demands an explanation. Even for an emperor, they would have cost a fortune. Creating them would have required years of work and endless ingenuity, as workers struggled to make clay statues on a scale never attempted before. And when they were finally finished, they were buried out of sight for all time. Why did Cheng Shi Huangdi go to all the trouble and expense of making them? Nearly 200 kilometers west of the first emperor's tomb, archaeologist Jiang Hongwei is in charge of another tomb where the search for answers begins. In 537 BC, some 300 years before the first emperor unified China, this gigantic pit was the tomb of Qing Jinggung, ruler of the small kingdom of Qing and the first emperor's ancestor. And these wooden boxes are grim reminders of what happened here on the day he was buried. The ritual killing of his entire court.
When Qin Jinggung passed away, he buried 186 living people with him. They were buried in these coffins. Each coffin was numbered, and each victim was also given a number. Every victim was buried in the coffin with his or her number. The position of every coffin had been pre-assigned.
Pride of place went to the rulers, ministers, and wives, assigned to the coffins nearest his own. Cruder caskets in the outer ranks held the royal craftsmen, bodyguards, and other useful commoners. All of them killed to serve their lord in death as they had in life. This was the biggest human sacrifice ever found in an ancient Chinese tomb. But it wasn't the only one.
Almost every big tomb would have 100 to 200 corpses. This is a massive number.
Body counts like these from royal tombs conjure up images of slaughter. But the evidence doesn't support a bloodbath. These are the bones of some of the people buried in Qing Jinggong's tomb. And according to archaeologist Jiang Zhongli, some of these people were happy, or at least willing, to die.
At
that time, people believed that there was another world where people could carry on their lives after death. Rulers, attendants, and followers were enjoying their lives with their masters when he was alive, so it was quite natural to follow him when he died. For them, death was another form of life.
Some people were terrified and unwilling to die, but some other people thought their lives were meaningless without their master. So they wanted to follow their master to death and considered this a big honor.
Mass human sacrifice in China finally fell victim to an even bigger slaughter. Less than 65 years after Qing Jinggong's funeral, China's 7 kingdoms plunged into war. It was called the Time of the Warring States, and it lasted over 250 years. As generation after generation died by the thousands and populations declined, sacrificing hundreds of people for the afterlife became an unaffordable luxury.
At that time, human life became more important. As a consequence of years of war, the population had decreased significantly. Each state was struggling to maintain its population, since population means productivity.
By the time the first emperor ended decades of war and unified China, human sacrifices were rare, and rulers were substituting more humane ways of providing for their afterlives.
In a tomb about 300 years older than the first emperor, we found small pottery figurines some tens of centimeters high. This shows that pottery figurines were replacing living beings as burial objects. From that point on, tombs which we found had more and more stuff of this kind.
But nothing like this. The first emperor inherited the tradition of tiny tomb figurines and took it off the charts. His tomb figures were life-size, and no 2 of them seem alike. Their shoes, their bodies, and especially their faces, all seem different. Some believe that the 8,000 clay warriors are all individuals, but no one's ever crunched the numbers until now. In Wellington, New Zealand, facial recognition expert Glenn Cameron is about to try something no one's tried before. Using NeoFace, a facial recognition software that's been rated best in the world.
It is being used throughout Asia and around the world in border control, surveillance, immigration, and by the police. We can match around 1 million faces per second. So we're very proud of it, and we think it's going to do a good job at today's mission.
That mission is to analyze the faces of about 100 terracotta warriors, comparing eyes, noses, mouths, and other significant features, trying to find any that match.
let's have a quick look at these top matches here. These two are the big, fatter chins. So here we have very similar chin lines, the big, thick chin, similar mouth position. Nose is slightly different, but the eyes, eyebrows, very different. There's a huge range of faces here, very individual, very individual. Whole head, very different in shape. Very different facial hair. A lot of difference in the eyes. This guy's looking quite sad. Look at the eyebrows on this one. Nearly frowning. Very entertaining facial features in the eyes, the eyebrows. So this one here, quite a flat nose. And this one here, more normal. There's some similarities between the warriors, like some chins or the mouths, the eyes, the nose, but they're all very unique. I think this is incredibly exciting, and I'm just astounded that they could be produced in these sort of numbers and made so individual.
8,000 individuals. But were they portraits of the Emperor's soldiers? Or products of the warrior maker's imaginations? We'll never know. But one thing is clear. Creating 8,000 clay individuals made the job of producing the terracotta warriors even harder than it seems. And failure was not an option. Day 1 of terracotta warrior production. Around 221 BC. What was it like to face the challenge of making life-size soldiers out of clay when you'd never done it before? Just ask this man. And this one. Jiang Binruo and Han Pingqi make terracotta warriors for a living. Their factories turn out thousands of terracotta warrior replicas every year. A thriving business feeding a worldwide fascination with the first emperor's army of clay.
Our terracotta warriors are exported to countries like the United States, Germany, Japan, United Kingdom, and France. We manufacture around 50,000 small terracotta warriors each year, and about 200 full-size figures. Besides the traditional statues, we also modify some elements according to our clients' needs. This warrior is playing golf. We made it for our client, the Yajian Golf Club. The golf club gives it to winners as a trophy.
Today, or 2,000 years ago, success depends on finding a clay that's tough enough to make a life-sized warrior. Jiang Binruo searched far and wide until, some 17 kilometers away from the terracotta warriors, he finally found a clay that could stand up to the job.
This is called red clay. It is sticky and strong. We searched many places and could not find anywhere else with this much red clay. But we find that this place has a lot. Now we only use red clay from here to make terracotta warriors. 2,000 years ago, I think terracotta warriors would have been impossible to make with any other soil or clay.
For the first emperor's craftsmen, finding the right clay would have solved the first big problem of making a life-size warrior. But it would not have solved an even bigger problem. How to make thousands of them. And fast. The first emperor died in 210 BC, only 11 years after he ordered his terracotta army. To finish 8,000 warriors in 11 years, his craftsmen must have made over 700 a year, more than 3 times the annual number of life-size figures modern replica makers produce. How did they do it? One clue comes not from the warriors themselves, but from something they once held in their hands. Yang Fuzi is a 10th-generation bowmaker. He makes replicas of ancient Chinese crossbows, like the ones once held by some terracotta warriors. Even today, the hardest part is casting the crossbow's metal trigger, a challenge that's made Yang deeply respectful of the men who made those triggers 2,000 years ago.
We found one trigger at one city and another trigger at another city that is 2,000 miles away. Parts of the trigger are exchangeable. In modern terms, these are standardized parts. I don't know how they designed these parts. Even now, this is not an easy job. Even experienced artisans need to work carefully.
Archaeologist Liu Zhangcheng is an expert on the weapons found with the terracotta warriors. He's impressed too.
We found more than 30,000 arrowheads in the pits. We tested the arrowheads and found the difference in their sizes to be less than 1 centimeter. Some of them only have a difference of 0.22 millimeters. The difference is very tiny. We know that weapon manufacturing was standardized.
The first emperor's weapon makers signed their work. And so did his warrior makers. Archaeologist Yuan Zhongyi has identified their names.
In each of the figure rings, you can find the name of the craftsperson in the most hidden places. They did this in hope that people would never see their names.
But why did they sign their work when they wanted to remain anonymous? It seems they didn't have a choice.
This is to allow their managers and superiors to check their work. If things are not constructed well, the worker may be asked to recraft them, or in the worst-case scenario, go to jail or be decapitated.
As they began work, the warrior makers must have had two major advantages: years of experience on the imperial assembly lines, and knowing that the likely alternative to success was death. Both would no doubt have helped them solve the immense problem of making 8,000 life-size figures in just over 10 years. But how exactly did they do it? After years of trial and error, modern replica makers have learned there's only one way to quickly mass-produce big clay statues: pushing the clay into a mold, waiting 2 or 3 hours for the clay to harden, removing the mold and propping up the clay torso with wooden sticks, while workers carve details, making heads, hands and legs in separate molds, letting everything dry out for 10 days to 2 weeks, then firing all the pieces separately in the kiln. The replica makers have learned that if they made a whole statue, it would collapse under its own weight before it dried, or fill with hot air and explode in the kiln.
Because we mass produce, making hundreds or thousands of copies of one statue, molding is the only way.
And that's not just his opinion. Archaeologists agree that 2,000 years ago, the first emperor's craftsmen knew that molding was the key to efficient mass production.
Mass production was the only way to explain the large numbers of arrowheads we found. The difference between arrowheads is tiny. I think they used molds, so they were able to produce massive amounts of arrowheads with tiny differences.
Case apparently closed. Ancient warrior makers must have met the mass production challenge by using molds, just like modern warrior makers do. There's only one problem. That's not how they did it.
This broken half-body gives us very important information about how terracotta warriors were made. We can see the internal traces of the clay layers here. which shows how the clay coiled up. The sign of how the clay coiled up and joined together is very clear. Here's one clay coil. Here's another clay coil. One coil after another, until the clay layers were all joined up inside the body. You see this layer, this layer, this layer, until it reaches this place, near the bottom, one by one. So, this is how a terracotta warrior is made.
The ancient evidence leaves no doubt. The original terracotta warriors weren't just stamped out of molds. Molds did play a part, making hands, ears, and heads. But incredible as it seems, the bodies of all 8,000 terracotta warriors were made individually, by hand, and with techniques that were revolutionary for their time.
The ancient craftsmen used a simple method. They pounded the clay until it became soft, and rolled the clay into strips. Then they coiled the clay strips upward. We call this method clay coiling. The first emperor's craftsmen were the first people in China to make statues this way.
Coiling seems an incredibly laborious way to make over 700 statues a year. Just how hard was it? Archaeologist Chang Zhongli has decided to find out. By making a terracotta warrior torso the old-fashioned way, with replica maker Han Pengzhe and his master craftsman.
When we opened our business, we weren't sure how to make a terracotta warrior. I read about the traditional clay coiling method, and we tried it. It took us a month to finish one statue.
The heart of the challenge: make a figure that's 180 centimeters tall, but only 2 centimeters thick, that won't distort or collapse under its own weight, a danger that grows greater and greater as the coiling goes higher and higher. Supporting the figure with wooden sticks helps, but the only real solution is to stop and let the clay dry over and over again before coiling higher. That means stopping work long enough to let the clay dry, but not so long that it dries too much and cracks.
When I looked at the terracotta warriors, I was amazed by the ancient people's achievement. My statues collapsed 3 or 4 times when I first started.
Today, molding a warrior takes 10 days to 2 weeks. Coiling one can take as long as a month. So why did the first emperor's craftsmen, ancient masters of the assembly line, choose coiling over molding? Because molding may be the best way to make the same statue over and over again, but coiling is the best way to make 8,000 different ones.
If these statues were made with molding, it would only be efficient if we made the same copy over and over again. This was not the goal of the ancient people. With the clay coiling method, it is easier to make each terracotta warrior different, whether it was fat or slim, tall or short. The idea was to create a group of humans.
But if coiling made more sense for individualizing the warriors, it was still a slower process. Only one thing could speed it up, and the first emperor knew it. Experts believe he made his terracotta army the same way he built his gigantic tomb, with massive manpower. Archaeologists have found 87 different names stamped on the terracotta warriors. So, 87 master craftsmen must have been in charge of making them. A team of apprentices would have worked under each master. Experts estimate 10 apprentices per team, making at least 87 teams with nearly 1,000 workers. Coiling one statue every month, each team could have finished 12 warriors every year, and all 8,000 in only 8 years. But today's replica makers know that having a huge labor force wouldn't have solved one final problem. A problem that could have destroyed their production schedule. In northern China, winter temperatures plunge below zero, while summer soars to 35 degrees. Both extreme cold and extreme heat will ruin clay statues before they can harden.
From long experience, I think the coiling method that was used 2,000 years ago could not have been done at such temperatures. Ideally, the temperature needs to be maintained at around 20 degrees Celsius.
Without the benefit of modern heating and cooling systems, the ancient warrior makers faced a stark choice. Find a way to keep their workshops at 20 degrees all year round, or stop work for 6 months of the year. No one knows what they did. But replica maker Jiang Binruo has his own theory. Cave houses, dug out of the hillsides by farmers living near the first emperor's tomb. Warm in winter, cool in summer, they're ideal places to live while tending crops. Jiang believes that 2,000 years ago, they were also ideal places to make terracotta warriors.
In the summer, the temperature outside may reach 30 degrees Celsius. Inside the cave house, it may only be 20 to 25 degrees Celsius. In the winter, outside may be minus 10 degrees Celsius, while the cave house remains at 15 to 20 degrees. They sculpted the terracotta warriors in cave houses, then fired the statues by sealing the entry of the cave house and turning it into a kiln, so they could fire the statues inside.
The trials and errors of today's warrior makers bring us as close as we can get to the challenges facing the ancient creators of the terracotta warriors. Sculpting 8,000 warriors in just over a decade, no two of them alike, when no one had ever done it before. But the evidence also shows that making thousands of clay statues wasn't the end of their labors. To satisfy their emperor, the ancient warrior makers had to meet one more challenge. Today, experts are reconstructing the final work that finished the terracotta warriors. What they've discovered has delighted some and shocked others. After more than 35 years, experts have learned a lot about restoring the terracotta warriors. But they're still unable to prevent an archaeological tragedy. Warriors emerge from the earth bearing traces of color. But those colors vanish within a week, sometimes minutes after excavation. Conservation expert Zhou Tie and his team race the clock to save what they can. Our crew was the first ever allowed to film them at work on newly excavated terracotta warrior fragments never seen by the public, fresh from the ground after more than 2,000 years.
When people created the terracotta warriors 2,000 years ago, all the pits were full of color. When we excavated, the paints were almost gone. Only small areas of paint remained, and those were in poor condition. The paint can easily fall off after excavation.
For years, an international alliance of experts from China and Germany has battled to save the terracotta warriors' colors. A battle they still haven't won. But at least they've identified the enemy. A syrup-like substance with a pungent smell that was one of ancient China's most coveted treasures. Lacquer. According to German conservator Katharina Bleinsdorf, Every one of the 8,000 terracotta warriors got a coating of lacquer from head to toe.
Lacquer is a very stable material, and also in the antiquity they knew that it can survive centuries or even longer. So it had technical reasons, but also aesthetical reasons and reasons of meaning.
To understand why anyone would find this stuff beautiful and meaningful, you have to understand how valuable lacquer was 2,000 years ago. It was the ancient world's plastic, a hard resin that protected whatever it covered from decay. And when it dried, its brown color transformed into a glossy black nothing else could equal.
Lacquer wares were luxury goods, and it probably was so expensive that only the emperor could afford to lacquer a whole army.
But strength and beauty weren't the only things that made lacquer so expensive. It was also hard to get. The sap of the lacquer tree can't be harvested until the tree is 6 years old. And even then, only from June to September, when the weather is warm. Some experts believe it would have taken the sap of 25 trees to lacquer just one terracotta warrior, and as many as 200,000 trees to finish all of them. That's because lacquer harvesters can take only about 10 grams of sap from each tree, just enough to fill an egg cup.
And you can't take very much because otherwise the tree will die. So you do it once and you let it heal and then you continue it.
And the lacquer trees aren't the only ones at risk. Lacquer's related to poison ivy and poison sumac. Touching it, or just breathing its fumes, can make you wish you hadn't.
I tried to work with the lacquer several times just for experiments, and in the beginning not much happened, but then twice there was a strong reaction where really my hands and my whole face was covered with this rash. It's not painful, it's just itching, and you have to control yourself a lot not to scratch. And it's not really looking nice. And what normally happens is that you get this reaction several times, and then there's an immunization, so afterwards you don't get it anymore.
Or so she thought. Just breathing lacquer fumes during this interview triggered another reaction 2 days later. The first emperor's workers had to expose themselves to lacquer. But why do 21st century researchers do it? Because they know that lacquer is the key to saving the colors of the terracotta warriors.
The problem is that the lacquer layer was embedded in the wet soil for 2,200 years.
As soon as excavation exposes the wet lacquer to air, its moisture begins to evaporate. As it dries out, the lacquer begins to shrink until it curls up and separates from the clay, taking the paint with it.
Finally, the lacquer layers just flake off in tiny flakes, and then there's no chance to bring them back to the terracotta.
The only solution is to somehow keep the drying lacquer attached to the terracotta by replacing its water with something else that won't evaporate. One group of German scientists has tried coating warrior fragments with a plastic used to seal underground water pipes, then bombarding the plastic with electron beams from a particle accelerator, which evaporate water and bond the plastic to the lacquer. But that can't be done by archaeologists in the field, who may have only minutes to save a painted warrior.
We hope that we will find a method that is simple and cheap, easy to apply during the excavation, and that helps to preserve the lacquer layers in the first moment.
If saving what's left of the terracotta warriors' colors seems hard, reconstructing what they originally looked like seems next to impossible. The only clues are faded fragments of terracotta, bits of paint found in soil, and old excavation reports. But now, visitors to a Munich museum can see what the terracotta warriors really looked like. After years of painstaking research, Katharina Bleinsdorf and her colleagues have painted 2 warrior replicas, as they believed they looked on the day they were finished, over 2,000 years ago.
Many people were astonished or surprised because they didn't expect them to be so colorful. And some people were also really shocked because somehow they just liked the terracotta version and they found it's kind of disturbing it or breaking it up. And they really asked me, are you really sure that it has to be like this? It's based on our findings, so we are pretty sure that this is true. And they just have to get used to it. And we tell them that, of course, we are not going to repaint the originals.
Seeing the warriors restored to their original colors is surprising enough. But the surprises don't end there. When they analyzed surviving color fragments, conservation experts made an unexpected discovery. One of those ancient colors wasn't like all the rest. Its name is Chinese purple, and it's so mysterious that halfway around the world at California's Stanford University, inside the synchrotron radiation light source, the world's most powerful X-ray machine, a team of scientists has focused a light 1 billion times brighter than the sun on a few flakes of Chinese purple, trying to find out exactly what they're made of.
Now actually we know we have the first concrete material evidence.
Zhe Liu, Apurva Mehta, and Nobumichi Tamura are all physicists, but they're trying to solve an archaeological mystery.
We're looking at one clamp of the Chinese purple pigments, and the size is around 50 microns. So it's about the cross-section of your hair. From very tiny sample, you can tell a very big story.
The big story starts with the fact that Chinese purple is one of only 2 entirely man-made colors produced anywhere in the world before the birth of Jesus. The other was Egyptian blue, created by chemists working for the pharaohs thousands of kilometers from China and centuries before the Silk Road opened up trade between China and the West.
People speculate there's a technology transfer from Egypt to China because of the similarity between those 2 materials, which is really significant in terms of technology development and communication between 2 civilizations.
The synchrotron light beam confirmed that Chinese purple and Egyptian blue shared all the same ingredients, with 2 exceptions. Egyptian blue contains calcium, but Chinese purple contains barium. And the Chinese also added something the Egyptians never used: lead oxide.
It indicates that the Chinese really actually invented the Chinese purple completely independently from the Egyptian. There was no technology transfers at all here.
And that told us that the technology they used for forming this material was very unique.
But if it wasn't brought from Egypt, how was Chinese purple invented? The team believes the answer isn't found in art or science, but in religion. This burial suit was made for a Chinese ruler who went to his grave not long after the terracotta warriors went to theirs. A suit made of thousands of pieces of jade. 2,000 years ago, the Chinese elite believed jade would magically make them immortal and paid alchemists to find a formula for making jade. The alchemists created a jade look-alike called Chinese glass, made with barium and lead, the 2 key ingredients of Chinese purple. As they searched for the secrets of immortality, did they also create Chinese purple? Chinese glass and Chinese purple had nearly identical compositions, and their apparent connection doesn't end there. About 250 AD, some 500 years after the Terracotta warriors, China's religious beliefs began to change. People no longer buried themselves in jade to make their bodies immortal. Chinese glass disappeared. Chinese purple also disappeared at exactly the same time and was never made again. Stanford's synchrotron has shed its light on Chinese purple's sacred past. And across the United States, another powerful scientific tool has revealed Chinese purple's potential to make a better world. In Tallahassee, Florida, scientists have discovered that the Terracotta warriors' purple paint is much more than just a beautiful color. A discovery made here at the National High Magnetic Field Laboratory, home of the 45T hybrid, the world's most powerful magnet, packing 45 Teslas of magnetic force. Facility Director Eric Palm has a simple way of showing what 45 Teslas can do.
If I take this steel washer closer to the magnet, you can see that it will be pulled and attracted to the magnet. I believe that the stored energy is about 20 sticks of dynamite. It's dangerous enough that we don't typically allow people to be, that have not been trained to be around the magnet. We don't allow people to bring tours where they can see the magnet just in case something bad happens.
A chance many might not care to take. But scientists from around the world, like Suchitra Sebastian of Cambridge University, sign up for magnet time year after year.
We have to be really careful not to have anything magnetic several feet within the magnet. This could be actually fatal because we've seen what could happen if just a tiny wrench is let loose. You just actually feel it being ripped out of your hand and being literally sucked into the magnet. And this is crucial because if you were to be holding something like a large spanner or something like a chair, if a steel chair happened, it could literally kill someone if they were standing in its way.
So what draws scientists like a magnet, to the 45T hybrid? Simply this. If you load just about any material on Earth into this magnet's core, and then pump in liquid helium to cool it down to hundreds of degrees below zero, the 45T hybrid's power will force that material to reveal its secrets. In 2006, Suchitra Sebastian and Neil Harrison put a few flakes of Chinese purple into the magnet's core and saw things never seen before. Inside the magnet, the molecules of Chinese purple became a single magnetic wave. The team dropped the temperature even further, and the magnetic wave lost its third dimension, separating into individual two-dimensional planes.
Well, when I first saw this, I guess we were just in disbelief. It was a complete surprise. I mean, it was a totally new type of discovery.
A discovery that might change the world. Because studying shifts from 3 to 2 dimensions could help make better superconductors. And better superconductors could mean more efficient magnetic trains, lower electricity bills, and faster computers.
It's incredible to think that this material that's been around for more than 2,000 years, that was initially discovered and in fact created by Chinese chemists and has been on this terracotta army for 2,000 years. It's incredible to think that we've revisited this material, something that's a fundamental advance in our understanding, in our 21st century knowledge of physics, and that's just mind-blowing.
What other new secrets might still be hidden within this ancient army of clay? Over 2,000 years ago, the Terracotta warriors were an emperor's vision and a brilliant technological achievement. Today, science is revealing just how brilliant that achievement really was, and making us wonder if all we've learned about these ancient masterpieces may be only a beginning.
Don't miss Vatican Hidden World, part of a trio of Easter specials, brand new this Sunday from 6. Stay tuned for the premiere of World's Oldest Child.